In this video, you're going to learn how to make a simple crochet square. You'll need a crochet hook. The number and the letter size should be listed on the crochet hook, and you'll need just some basic yarn. You're going to start out by making a slip knot. So a slip knot is a knot that comes undone. A simple way to explain it is to make a loop out of your yarn and then reach through that loop and grab the tail end of the yarn and start to pull it through, but don't let it pull all the way through. Keep that little tail end from going all the way through the loop, and as you tighten, it should create a loop that can easily come undone if you pull on both of the tail ends. I'll show you one more time here. You make a loop with the tail end of your yarn. You reach through the loop and grab that tail end, and you start to pull it through, but don't let it go all the way through the loop. If you can pull on the tail end and your knot comes undone, that's a slip knot. If it stays where it was, that's not the correct knot. You're going to adjust the knot so it's nicely snug on your hook, and you should have 2 strings hanging down from your hook. One of the strings is not connected to the ball of yarn, that's the tail end, and one of the strings is connected to the ball of yarn, that one is the working end. Your right hand, your dominant hand, generally is going to hold the crochet hook, and your non-dominant hand has 2 tasks, to hold the working end and to hold the tail end. I'm going to cut my tail end a little shorter so it's easier to see the difference. Generally, I put the yarn over my pointer finger, under my middle finger, over my ring finger, and under my pinky. I separate my pointer finger as if I'm pointing up, and then I turn my wrist and use my middle finger and my thumb as sort of pinching fingers. So these pinching fingers are going to grab the knot that's connected to the bottom of the loop that's on my hook. If you can slide your yarn back and forth on your hook without moving your right hand, you know that you're holding your crochet or your yarn correctly. You want to hold that knot, and you don't want to hold further down the tail end. There are about 1 million ways to hold a crochet hook and to hold the yarn. So basically you just need to figure out a way that you're holding the working end so it's kind of stretched out, and you need to hold the tail end so it's pinched between 2 fingers. So you can find tons of different ways that are comfortable for you. For example, wrapping it around your pointer and putting the rest of the yarn through your fist. As long as the working end is being held out and the tail end is being pinched, you're good to go. I prefer the over-under, over-under, pointer finger up, wrist turned, pinching fingers being the thumb and the middle finger. But you try to find a way that works for you, that feels comfortable for you. Test out moving that crochet hook back and forth. Now we're going to make a chain stitch. You're going to put the yarn over your hook, goes from back to front. You're going to turn your hook to face the ground and pull your hook through the loop that was on the hook. I'm going to show you that again. The yarn's going to go over. The hook is going to turn to face the ground, and you're going to pull that loop through the loop that was on your hook. I'm going to move my pinching fingers up every time I make a stitch. yarn over, turn, pull through, yarn over, turn, pull through. This is your chain. Each of these is considered a stitch. If you pull them, they completely come undone. I'll show you this one more time here. Make a slip knot. Tighten the slip knot on your hook, not too tight. Weave that yarn through your fingers, pointer finger up, pinching fingers in place. The yarn goes from back to front. Gets kind of caught in that little notch. If you put it from front to back, when you turn the hook, it's just going to continually fall out. So the yarn shouldn't be in the front. It should always start by going from back to front. So it wraps from the back to the front. If you're pulling and both of your stitches are getting caught, no matter how hard you pull, those are both going to stay caught in that little notch. If that happens to you, reset, loosen your loop a little bit, and sneak that yarn through. You may have to pull down a tiny bit with your fingers to make that loop big enough to sneak through each time. Yarn from back to front, pull through. Now you do have to be aware not to make huge chain stitches. So you don't want big loose chain stitches. You want to try to keep them consistent so each chain stitch looks the same as the one before it. Yarn goes over, hook turns, you carefully sneak it through that loop. Yarn over, through, yarn over, through. Keep doing this until you feel totally comfortable making a chain. If some of your chain stitches are super tight, try making them a little looser. If some of them are super giant, try making them more consistent. When you feel really comfortable, what I'm going to have you do is undo that chain, and we're going to start fresh from the beginning with just our first loop. Now what we're going to do is we're going to chain or make 10 chain stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So you can stop at 10. You'll be able to count those stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. The one that's currently on your crochet hook doesn't count as a stitch yet. So this is going to be the base of our crochet project. In order to go to our next row, we have to make one extra chain stitch, and we'll actually skip that one when we start doing our next crochet row. But at the end of every row, you have to create a chain stitch. So technically here, I have 10 basic chains, and then I made one extra, so I have 11 total. They all look consistent, they all look the same. This is how I know I'm ready to move on to my next row. In order to start my next row, I'm going to stitch into the second stitch from the hook. So I'm technically skipping one stitch, and I'm going to insert my hook into the second stitch. So I'm simply just putting my hook through that loop, and now it looks like there are 2 stitches on my hook. There's a lot going on here, but I'm going to use my pinching fingers to keep that yarn sort of out of the way so I can see my 2 stitches pretty easily. I'm going to yarn over, turn my hook, and pull through just the first loop. So now there are still 2 loops. I'll yarn over again and pull through both. This combination is considered a single crochet stitch. Pretty confusing. This big loop here has a stitch coming out of the top. You can see that there's a big opening and then the stitch coming out of the top. That's the one I just did. For my next one, I'm going to pick the stitch next to it that does not have a stitch coming from the top part of it. So I'll insert my hook. I should have 2 loops on my hook. Use my pinching fingers to make everything look neat. Yarn over, turn, pull through 1. Yarn over, pull through 2. So you can see here that this stitch that I just stitched into, it has that stitch coming out of the top there. The one next to it is completely empty. That's the one I'm going to stitch into next. Insert my hook. Yarn over through 1. Yarn over through 2. I'll repeat this in every loop all the way across my chain. Here's my next stitch. I should end up with 10. Insert into the next stitch, yarn over through 1, yarn over through 2. Next stitch, yarn over through 1, yarn over through 2. If you accidentally stitch into the same one twice, what's going to happen is your crochet project is going to start to curl. If you notice that happening, go back and make sure that each chain stitch only has 1 single crochet stitched into it. When you get to the end, don't forget the last loop. It's kind of attached to that knot, but that does count as a loop. And when you get all the way to the end, you should still have 10 stitches, so you can go back and count them. Make 1 extra chain stitch, since we're at the end of a row, and then you're going to flip your entire project to the left. So we can look at our stitches here. And then there's that extra chain stitch on the end we just stitched. You're going to insert your hook into the first stitch. Not the chain stitch, not the extra stitch. The first stitch that's attached to everything else. Here's that loop right there. Not the chain stitch, first crochet stitch. Insert your hook, yarn over through 1, yarn over through 2. And then every single crochet stitch, you can see the loops here, will get a stitch into it. So insert your hook, yarn over through 1, yarn over through 2, insert, yarn over through 1, yarn over through 2, you'll repeat this all the way to the end of your row. be careful not to skip the last stitch. It's a little harder to see because the loop is a little more hidden, but there's one loop left here, and if we skip that, our project will get skinnier and skinnier with every row. So make sure to get that last stitch. If you need to go back through and count them, you should have 10. Make one extra chain stitch because we're at the end of the row, and then turn your project to the left. You should still have 10 stitches. If you don't, try to go back and figure out what went wrong. We're going to repeat all the same steps, going into every single one of these stitches, making sure we still have 10. You're going to crochet into the first loop, not the chain stitch, the first loop, and you'll repeat in every single loop all the way to the end of the row, just like before. The 10th stitch is sometimes a little bit trickier to see. It's there on the end. I still have 10, so I'm good to go. I'll make an extra chain stitch. Then I'll turn my project to the left, and I'll repeat that process again. So you'll keep moving back and forth in your rows until your crochet project starts to look like a little square. Take your time. If you notice your project is getting skinnier as it goes or getting fatter as it goes, that means you're either skipping a stitch or adding a stitch. Keep counting to make sure you still have 10 and that you're not skipping the one on the very end. It's generally pretty hard to see, so you have to make sure you get that last stitch on the end. When you finish your square, it should look pretty even on the side. If it tapers in like a slice of pizza, what happens is that you were missing the last stitch in your row. If it widens out, that means you're adding a stitch. In order to end your project, you're simply going to remove your hook and cut the yarn that's attached to the ball of yarn. And you're going to put that end through the loop where your hook was. When you pull tight, it should make a simple knot, and then your weaving project will not unravel, or your crochet project will not unravel. Your last step is to hide these little tail ends of yarn. We call that weaving them in. So you can do that either with an embroidery needle or just with your crochet hook. Basically, you just have to weave the end back and forth through the project to sort of hide that little tail end of yarn. It doesn't necessarily matter where you weave this in or if it's exactly perfect, but if it weaves in and out, and kind of hides within that project, you should be good to go. Once you weave it through a few times, you can cut any excess and just kind of make sure it stayed camouflaged in the rest of the project. And do this with both of the tail ends. At the end, you should have a little square, and you're good to go.